to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on sociology of work, today I am going to talk about the contribution of Emile Durkheim to understanding of work. He is considered as one of the founding figures in sociology and kind of contributed not directly in terms of looking at work or workplace norm, but his theory of social change or trying to understand the way in which social transformation was taking place help us to make sense of the workplace or the relations that we have in contemporary society. So he was most concerned about the society, trying to understand society from the collective perspective. For him, society was of significance, and he wanted to understand how the relation between individual and society could be strengthened. So, to give in a context, he was writing at a time of large scale change, lot of social economic changes was taking place, modes of production was changing, there was shift, population was moving more towards urban city places, and that within those changes there was a lot of theory coming in that integration has declined, the level of solidarity has declined, and it is in this context he was concerned about trying to figure out how the relationship between society and individual could be re-strengthened. So, at the same time, it does not, he was not kind of figure out, trying to stress that what individual has to do as a part of society. He was kind of trying to figure out how individual freedom might be reconciled. So, as a member of society, you enjoy your individual freedom, yet contribute to the integration of the society. So, a lot of theories were coming in which was suggesting that society, there was a growth of individualism. Collectivity had declined, new forms of institutions like associations were giving up, and community life was on decline. So, it was in this context that he kind of contributes, and his work, The Division of Labor in Society, becomes very significant in understanding the nature of transformation. Being a functionalist, he wanted to bring back the level of cooperation and integration. So, unlike Karl Marx, who was looking into conflict, difference, he is kind of stressing on the ways in which society kind of retains its integrative nature or solidarity. And to look into the solidarity or the level of integration of individual and society, Durkheim uses division of labor. Now, division of labor was seen as something which was more non-material, in the sense that it was allowing people to do the individual task in an industrial complex society, yet be dependent on the other. So, there was a relation of interdependence, and this relation of interdependence then kind of changes the form of solidarity. So, from a mechanical solidarity, which was a part of simple pre-industrial society, society moves towards complex industrial society with organic solidarity. So, his organic solidarity is taken in from organic analogy, that as now different organs of an organ are connected to each other and they all work together for the fitness of the organism. Similarly, from a functionalist perspective, Durkheim argued that there are different parts, there are different components, and each of these components or institutions perform their functions for the maintenance of the whole. Now, when we take this to an industrial setup and a work is being produced, then now the work is being divided or separated into different categories, and each kind of work is done by a specialized worker. Now, only when each one of them are dependent on each other and they do their work efficiently, will the end product be created. So, therefore, it was kind of a functional understanding of division of labor that he gives us. And if we try to understand his methodological perspective, that he was trying to understand the nature of industrial society, and for Durkheim, society was a reality sui generis, that is, it is something which is existing out there, and it is not kind of dependent on individual who makes of it. So it is something which will exist prior to the birth of an individual or the death. So the composition of the society might be changing, but the nature of society continues to be the same. Next, he talks about moral order, and in that context he looks into society as a moral society. It does not mean that every society is good. Moral or morality does not mean that everything is good. It only means that we need to have a moral bond. It is kind of having a say that collect consciousness. We need to be aware of a consciousness, and it is a consciousness that kind of prevents us from doing activity which is against the normal, that is, which is against the norms of the society. And this moral bond is what, from where he kind of locates the collective consciousness, that how do people follow the norms of society. It is because of the morality which is of more significant. The next characteristic, because he was understanding the Western society, he is trying to understand it from a kind of a crisis that the Western societies are undergoing, because there is a shift, there is a transformation, no doubt, and this shift has kind of eradicated some of the old norms and brought in new norms. For instance, because of kind of say industries coming up in urban areas, or because of new place of work, there was a change in the composition of the family. So people were not residing together along with their parents or with the brothers, but they were shifting and they were smaller in size family. So the theory of evolution of a nuclear family comes in. Now that does not mean that if the composition has changed, the integration has been effected. Even though they can be geographically located, it's a unit, it's a unity. So that is what he is trying to understand when he talks about the movement from, say, simple society to a complex society. And division of labor in society, he kind of doesn't say that it is kind of function or cause of division is advancement of human civilization. It is not that when division of labor happens, it is kind of indicating that the civilization has advanced or there is a kind of transformation in the civilization, because division of labor was there in the earlier civilization also. What is changed is the change in the form. So he denies that the cause of division of labor is human unceasing desire or happiness. So the entire theory which kind of says that since why are people indulging in more or progressive activity is because they are in search of more and more happiness. The entire theory of industrialization or the convergence theory of industrialization was based on the idea that when industrialization, science and technology would come in, it would kind of do away with some of the problems that human minds were playing. So, but that it kind of becomes a very utopian, where we see that the growth in science and technology need not always leads to happiness. It kind of created a lot of problems as well. So Durkheim was not kind of interested in understanding it as a growth of civilization. Rather, he said that the cause of division of labor must be in some social context. So he was not looking at it in terms of economic prosperity, but he was trying to understand the social context which has led to the change in division of labor. So he considered it as a kind of necessary consequence of change in social environment. So because the social relations were changing, the way people kind of related to each other, because there was movement population one from place to the other, that it led to a change in the division of labor. Now, in order to understand the change in the nature of division of labor, he uses the concept of moral density or dynamic moral density, and he says it increases in the ratio to the progress of division of labor. That is, as division of labor will progress, the moral density as well will also be more. So, the two cause that produces moral density is number one, the growth of cities and technologically advance in communication and transportation. So, the more cities, more growth and more, so the density of the population is increasing. As a result, the moral density will also be more. The second factor for increase is social volume of a society, and that is the total number of its members. So, as industrialization kind of brings about new innovative method, improvement in health system, and so the lot of control over disease and ailments. So, there is increase in the population, plus there is a kind of a movement from rural areas to urban areas. So, all cities and urban areas, there is increase in density. Now, because there is increase in the population, because there is an increase in the moral density, then division of labor has to change. And when itself, so we see that the moral density is kind of leading to a change in the division of labor. Now, when he talks about division of labor in the industrial society, he talks about the normal and the abnormal, where he says that in a normal division of labor, there will be a kind of equality, similarity between social inequality and natural inequality. And when he talks about abnormal, he talks about two forms, which he calls as anomic division of labor and forced labor. So, with the growth of industrialization, more and more instances of abnormal division of labor is seen as happening. So, when we try to understand normal division of labor, what does Durkheim mean by normal division of labor? As I already said, it is a condition in which social inequality is kind of exactly the same as natural inequality. Now, what is natural inequality? Natural inequality, it would be in terms of gender or in terms of age. So, he accepted natural inequality for granted, though there could be a lot of feminist critique to it, because it kind of strengthens patriarchal subordination of women. But for Durkheim, natural inequality, or that was the differences, age difference, gender difference, was taken as a criteria for establishing social inequality. And if that was there, that if kind of assumes natural inequality to be a part of the work society, then the difference between men and women, or the sexual division of labor, would be considered as normal according to Durkheim. So, the gender based division of labor was considered as a good example of natural inequality mirroring the social inequality. When we go to abnormal division of labor, he says that this abnormal means that it is not something which is found on an average. So, this is something which would be kind of found in less a number, and the whole idea of abnormal is that you cannot use your labor in a meaningful sense, of in a fulfilling way. In a very different way, we say that the division of labor has certain hurdles or obstruction which does not allow for the function of the society. So, in the sense that it will affect the integration of the society, or what we can say, it will affect the solidarity of the society. So, the two threats to integration or cohesion in modern society are anomie and meaninglessness, unjustifiable inequality. Now, there was kind of, we know that there are a lot of inequalities, and these inequalities are not based on kind of the merit of the individual or maybe the skill of the individual. So, there could be several instances where there could be the division of labor is affected by the way in which certain practices comes into hinder its functioning. When we look into the anomie or anomic division of labor, which is an abnormal form of division of labor, Durkheim referred to the meaninglessness of work. So, you are doing a work, but it will not give you any amount of satisfaction. The work will remain meaningless for you, and this could a transient form of generated between the collapse of mechanical solidarity and the creation of organic solidarity. So, the shift from mechanical to solidarity is not abrupt, it will take a kind of a time, and in between the two, the division of labor becomes abnormal, because work is kind of becomes not meaningful. So, this can be explained when we look into the entire concept of, say, transition, where men were working, say, on the field as agricultural labor, and then they have to move to industry. So, before they can actually accumulate to the industrial workplace, and they kind of adjust to it, work remains meaningless to them. So, during this phase, they've kind of they have to kind of adjust to the workplace or accept society. It could also lead to de-skilling, because you are shifting from one location to the other. You had certain skills which will now not be used. So, they will be a little about level of de-skilling. Now, the second form of abnormal labor is forced labor. Now, forced division of labor, according to Durkheim, is where division of labor is not allowed to develop spontaneously, and where, say, some act is done to protect themselves and the position. Now, this talks about the favoritism or corruption, bureaucratization of industrial society, which affects division of labor. So, division of labor does not remain voluntary, it is something which is kind of obstructed. So, forced labor prevents individual from achieving positions which could be consistent with the natural ability, and indicates a forced division of labor. For instance, if we were to give example of forced division of labor, slavery or caste system, like we know in the caste system, the members of the lower caste were prevented from kind of doing certain kind of work, or they were kind of denied the right. For instance, if they were not allowed to kind of be educated or enter the temple, so they had that natural capacity to do it, but because of the caste system, they were prevented from participating in the normal division of labor. So, this was forced division of labor. So, all members of this lower caste were kind of forced to do, say, manual scavenging or kind of do the menial work. So, this kind of deciding the occupation to be done on the basis of another system would be explained as forced labor. Now, in modern society, there are many examples of forced labor, but just to give a few of them, where certain positions, say positions in the government office or positions in bureaucracy, are acquired by bribery or by favoritism or by recommendation, which kind of denies that position to the one who could acquire it through natural ability. So, two individuals with the same qualification, with the same skill, one would get the position because of his affiliation to another person, and the other would be denied. So, this is again a forced division of labor. And what would actually happen is, in many situations, because of overgrowth of the population, because unemployment and favoritism and red tapeism, a number of individuals do not get the work which is kind of up to their qualification. So, even here the work would be meaninglessness. For instance, we have heard in many cases in India especially, where people are highly educated, but yet they are kind of doing work which is beyond much lower than the level. So, there is you will not get that same amount of satisfaction, there will be meaninglessness, and that is what Durkheim means by forced labor. When he talks about anomic division of labor, because his entire focus was on anomy, and that was disintegration or normlessness, he talks about two forms of anomic division of labor. So, the first is anomy and the second is egoism. Now, anomy means normlessness. When we talk about normlessness, it was kind of a situation where individual cannot function freely. You are bounded by certain rules, and you don't follow that rule. So, there is a normlessness. You don't follow any kind of moral code. You don't follow any kind of rules that could affect your. So, that is lawlessness or normlessness. And Durkheim was kind of saying that it was inherent in all kind of institutions and functionings of modern industrial societies. So when it looks into anomic form of division of labor as an abnormal, he also kind of tries to understand a very important psychological phenomena, which is suicide. So he relates anomy and suicide in order to understand the way in which the collective consciousness or solidarity was declining and individualism was increasing. And for this, his work on suicide becomes very important. So when there is an excess of rule, then it becomes fatalistic suicide. So if there is too much of rule, then it becomes fatalistic. If it is less rule, then it is anomic. So he tries to understand suicide as dependent on two facts. One is social integration, that is the power of society to give the individual member legitimate goals. So how much you feel as belonging to the society, as integrated, that's social integration. And the second cause of suicide he traces to moral regulation. How much is the society able to kind of regulate the behavior of an individual? And in this we will see that there are 4 forms of suicide which he basically talks about, but it is kind of could be paired into 2. So the egoist is when one is kind of very self-centered. So the level of integration of the society is very low. So you are an egoist person implies that you are more kind of individual disposition. So you are more concerned about your own success, you are more concerned about your own personality, and you don't care about the society. In that sense, when there is a kind of high degree of individualism, or we can say a low degree of integration with the society, then there are chances of egoistic suicide to happen. Now the opposite of egoistic suicide is altruistic suicide. In egoistic, there is lot of individualism. In altruistic suicide, the level of integration is very high. So when individual kind of has too much of attachment with the society, and one can give their life for the society. For instance, say soldiers going on the war and kind of giving up their life. So the n number of suicide which could be called. But here he says that this is a clear type of social type of suicide, because it is talking about the integration of the society. It is the duty of individual to see the welfare of the society. So he could be giving 3 types of suicide: the old man threatened with severe illness, suicide of a woman on death of the husband, suicide of followers on the death of the chief. So these are different types that he is talking about. But then this is one set, that egoistic and altruistic. The second set is anomic suicide, where and fatalistic suicide. Anomic suicide is when the integration norm is very low. There is no norm, it's a lawlessness, and because you cannot find yourself attached to any kind of regulation, there is no level of value in the society, it could lead to suicide. The opposite of anomic suicide is fatalistic suicide, where it is kind of over exercise of regulation, which it is very strict, and it becomes difficult for individual to kind of cope with that suicide. So if we look into this diagram, it will help us to understand how he is relating anomy and normlessness to understand suicide. And that is, if we look into social integration as a cause, we see on the left we see a minus sign, which is egoistic, that is the integration is low. On the other side, we see altruistic, which is kind of extra integration, too much of integration, the collective feeling is too high. The second pair is anomic and egoistic. Anomic, there is less amount of law and order. Egoistic, the level of law and order is more stringent. So that is what he talks about when he looks into the relation between, though there is a lot of critical assessment in terms of trying to understand Durkheim as more psychological, but then it helps us to a large extent understand the way in which society is changing. Now when we look into anomy, he is also talking about regulation. and how do we bring about collective solidarity back. And for that he kind of professed a socialist idea. He considered the methodological assumption of economic determinism in Marxism as over restrictive, and he says morally grounded and socially regulated social institution with increased division of labor that allowed growth of individual skills would create evolution, not revolution. And he kind of even not suppose the role of state. He kind of gives it entire focus on individual capacity and the society to restructure division of labor in order to control the level of disintegration. So, this was his idea of looking into the change in the shift from collectivity to individualism. And when we look into the theory of Durkheim, it will help us grapple a lot of problems and issues which contemporary society is facing today. So, with this I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.